EBIT minus interest, or EBIT is equal to basically sales minus costs minus depreciation. All of those income concepts talk to different people. If I'm worried about company making money, I basically want to look at EBIT because different companies have different taxes. As we have seen, NVIDIA's tax rate, effective tax rate, is much higher than Apple. So comparing that on that is almost like apples and oranges. But I also don't want to look at necessarily interest. I want to see how the companies do before I worry about things like different taxation regimes and the way they keep cash or they borrow. In a sense, I'm looking at the earnings of the company as if the whole thing was financed by the shareholders. Sometimes we also look at a concept called EBITDA. This is EBIT plus depreciation and amortization. Remember, depreciation and amortization are non-cash expenses. So EBITDA kind of gives me a little bit cleaner picture. We're going to use these concepts quite a bit more when we're doing financial ratios in Chapter 3. For example, sometimes we're going to look at something called cash coverage ratio. It's to what extent your cash kind income is able to cover your interest expenses. That would be EBITDA divided by your interest expenses. So if I'm a lender to you, short term or long term, if that ratio is only 1, I'm concerned because you make only enough money to cover interest. And given how things are sensitive, I don't have too much of a cushion. But if you have a cash coverage ratio of 7, I can have a good night's sleep because I know that you make 7 times your interest expense as cash income. So I don't have to worry about you. Now, another identity we're going to use a lot. When you make certain amount of money, net income, there are 2 things that you're going to use that for. One is cash dividends. Not dividends, dividends. Change in retained earnings. So if you made $10 billion and you paid your shareholders $1 billion in dividends, then $9 billion you added to your retained earnings because it has to go somewhere. In certain problems, I don't tell you what net income is, and I want you to figure out how much the depreciation was. But I tell you revenues, costs, interest, tax rate, and you're probably thinking, how am I going to figure that out? Well, think of this equation. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 things, right? I told you 4 of those things: revenues, costs, interest, and tax rates. But I'm looking for depreciation. Well, you can solve that for depreciation if you knew what net income was. So you have to figure out what net income is. But if I told you dividends and change in retained earnings, you have net income and you can go ahead and calculate it. And in those videos that I posted, you have problems like that, okay? And you can solve problems like those either algebraically, I mean, for example, if I solve that for depreciation, algebraically that would be equal to net income divided by 1 minus tax rate. That would be an algebraic solution. Or alternatively, you could do goal seek. You could let Excel solve it for you. Let's do a quick example. Suppose I told you dividends, change in retained earnings, sales, costs, interest. Just gonna put in numbers: 1,000, 10,000. I don't know what depreciation is. If I knew what depreciation was, could I calculate net income? Yes. So I'm going to put an arbitrary number here, and I like coloring the things I don't know as blue. Yellow, bold. I'm going to put an arbitrary number, 2,500. If I knew what that was, sales minus cost minus interest minus depreciation. I forgot to add the tax rate. Let's say 25%. Times 1 minus tax rate. On the other hand, I have the net income actual. Dividends plus change in retained earnings. That means depreciation cannot be 2,500. And I can calculate the difference. I'm going to do data. What if analysis goal seek? Make that difference 0 by changing what I don't know, depreciation. Turns out it needs to be 13,333. If this is quite involved for you, that's okay. Just do the algebraic version. Yes. Remember, we have another identity for net income. It is the sum of dividends and change in retained earnings. So if I can't calculate the net income directly because I don't know depreciation, I can calculate it in a different way. So I'm going to pick the depreciation number in such a way that those two are equal. If we did the formula, net income actual divided by 1 minus tax rates, actually it's sales minus cost minus interest minus net income actual divided by 1 minus tax rates. What do you know? It's exactly the same number. Again, remember what I've been telling you from get-go. Mathematics is about getting to the answer. Whether you do that algebraically or you set up an equation and allow Excel to solve it for you. You know, some of you do not have the algebra skills to solve this equation without making a mistake. Is that your fault? Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. And at the end of the day, I don't care whose fault it is. Maybe you had a bad algebra teacher. Okay. You know, a lot of people come to me and say, I'm so bad at math. And my answer is always the same. There is no such thing as being bad at math. There are two kinds of people, those who are a good math teacher and those who are a bad math teacher. It's that simple. Obviously, you want to know and learn math. It doesn't matter how good your teacher is. If you have no interest in learning, you're not going to learn. And I'll give you that much. But, you know, from basically third grade on, people put a mystery on math.